on Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
You're listening to The Jan Price Show, and today my guest is Matt Hinton. And Matt wrote, directed, produced, edited, and did the cinematography for his brand new documentary called Parallel Love. Welcome to the show, Matt. You are a one-man production company.
Well, you know, when there's not all the money in the world laying around, you got to do more than one thing.
That's true. That's true. You wore many hats on this movie.
Yeah.
Really, and you're in the movie. Let's also say that too. You are in this movie. So this movie, let's tell the audience what this movie is about, and we'll get into some more detail about it.
So it's Parallel Love, the story of a band called Luxury. As one might guess, it's about a band called Luxury that formed in Georgia in the 90s. And there are a number of twists and turns along the way in the story, but some salient details include a catastrophic wreck that occurred on tour in the mid-90s that happened right after about a month after the first album was released. And eventually 3 of the guys in the band became Eastern Orthodox priests, which is unexpected. And so, yeah, but it's, like I say, any number of twists and turns along the way.
Well, that's why the title Parallel Love, because it's about love in so many different ways, actually, this movie is. So, Matt, how did you get involved in this project? Yeah,
so, well, I suppose I may as well say that I joined the band in 99. So, the band Luxury. So, we'd made, I guess, a couple of records after I joined the band, and then relatively recently, 3 or 4 years ago now, we decided that we would reconvene to make another record. But this time, 3 of the guys had become priests, and we had never made a record with priests in the band before. And I thought, well, that seems interesting. And I had made a film before, and so I kind of knew how to make a documentary. And so I said, well, I'm going to get a guy to come and maybe document like the recording session, and I'll see what we've got, because it just seemed kind of too interesting to pass up just as a story. So that was the beginning of the sort of intent of it. I had piles and piles of footage that I had shot over years, because I was familiar with the band well before I was in the band, and we had toured together. A band that I had been in prior to this we had toured together and so forth. And so I had a lot of footage and so forth, and I said, well, I think I have, the material that I need to at least start the thing. So that's what I did, and the documentaries take a long time. So
I was going to ask you, how long did it take you to put this documentary together?
I don't know. I haven't worked it out, but over 2 years just to edit the thing.
Oh, that's not bad, actually, though. That really isn't, because you hear it takes forever, 10 years or more sometimes. I've heard those stories. So
yes, I guess I was motivated. There's one way of looking at it. First footage I shot for it was in the mid-90s. So one way of looking at it is that it was 20 plus years. But no, 2 or 3 years, I would say, somewhere between 2 and 3 years.
So you started filming early on when this band started. First of all, it had a different name originally. So do you want to say what that name was?
Yeah, sure. That band, the name was The Shroud, which sort of looking back kind of feels like a goth rock type of thing, but that's not what it was. And I had shot, and to say film is putting it a little bit makes it sound like I was up to something. I really wasn't. It was strictly that I had a borrowed Digi 8 camcorder or something like that, and just would sort of for posterity would shoot rock and roll shows every so often. Not because I was like I say, I wasn't up to anything. There's always that kid that's got the camera, and I guess that was me.
Well, it turned out to be fortuitous, to say the least.
Indeed.
It really did. So Tell us a little bit about how this band evolved. How it had some really interesting roots, and how it evolved from the Shroud to Luxury, but also the type of music that they play. Can you talk? Let's get into that. Both of those questions. There's two questions there.
So the band, and if I don't answer your questions, or if I don't answer both of them, then you can get on to me and tell me what I didn't answer,
okay.
Just in case I'm not understanding right. So the band, like original members of the band that did not include me, met at a Christian college in Georgia, of all places, and for various reasons they were there. Like either because two of the guys, they were brothers, and their dad went to school there, and it just sort of, for whatever reason, sort of seemed like a natural place for them to be. But once they showed up, there was this very sort of conservative Christian environment that didn't really, culturally, in any event, did not fit sort of who they were particularly well. So what you had was, on this small campus, you had one kid that was really, really into like the Smiths, the sort of indie rock band from the 80s, and another guy that was really into Kiss and Led Zeppelin and AC/DC and stuff like that, which on any normal planet those two guys are not in a band together.
Right.
But that's the singer and the drummer. And then you've got a guy who's into straight ahead, like hardcore and punk rock type stuff, who again is not going to be in a band with either of those first two guys. And then finally you've got a guy who's more into sort of, I guess, U2 and maybe Echo and the Bunnymen and those kinds of, again, 80s alternative type things. And so those four guys together, who really don't belong in a band together, the question is part of it is that they were really they were the music geeks that didn't really have anything in common with other people on campus. And when you're in that sort of environment, like a very small, kind of narrow type of environment, people who, it's like, well, I guess this is all we got. Like, it's just the four of us, and so that's what what emerged. And like on one hand, you would say, well, these guys don't belong in a band together at all. A, how is it going to work? And B, if it does work, what is that going to sound like? And the answer turns out to be Luxury. That's exactly what it sounds like. It's very, like, the drums are very bombastic and crazy and heavy, and the bass is super heavy and sort of punkish, but then the vocals are very melodic and Smiths-esh, I guess, but just you'd almost have to say that it's a more feminine side to the band, where the rest of it's very aggressive. The vocals and melodies and stuff tend to have a somewhat lighter touch. So the beginning of the band was a very heavy band, but still with a melodic sensibility. And then over time, there was a maturity that took place, which hopefully doesn't equal, becoming boring or anything like that, but just I think a greater sense of who the band is and what they're supposed to be doing, and I guess now what we're supposed to be doing. And so actually in conjunction with the release of this film, well, not in conjunction, but fortuitously timed, the most recent Luxury record, which is called Trophies, is about to be released at more or less the same time that the film is being released. So, and that record is being well received critically. So, which I'm happy about, and so things are moving forward. So that's the record that was documented at the as we were making the film, or starting to make the film. So yeah. Very exciting.
But in the beginning, the group signed with a Christian label. Is that correct? And
yeah.
And then, but the music they played was anything
was ill-fitting.
it was not anything they considered Christian music at the time.
Right, not at all. So
No.
what I would say is that the best way to, I mean, even sounds, but like, on one hand, yes, it's true that they signed with that label. On the other hand, they were one of the first sort of 5 or 10 bands that signed with that label, and that label didn't have a clarified identity at that point, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
So they were they had a foot in that Christian rock world, which at the time, so this is in the early to mid 90s, and Christian rock kind of at that point sort of meant what most people think when they think of Christian rock, which is neither Christian nor rock, maybe. Like no one hears those words and says, "Ooh, I got to check this out." So, or not many people do. So I think that that this label, what they were trying to do was to create a label where they were sort of drawing from that community, where there were, in fairness, there were a handful of actually really interesting bands doing creative things that weren't necessarily, sort of preaching from the stage or anything like that, but just happened to have that identity. And so they were trying to do something, interesting, but still sell it to the general market. That is the so-called secular, rock world. And so at the time, that was very much they made the offer. And as someone in the film says, when your kid's in a band and anybody makes you, an offer of a record deal, you're going to be really interested, and it's hard to say no. And the band had been around for a little while, and somebody was making them an offer. And so, maybe they believed what they wanted to believe, which was that yes, these guys may be coming from the kind of Christian rock world in a way, but really what they're trying to do is do something that at the very least spanned those two different kind of music worlds, but certainly was sort of selling to the general market, which in fairness it did. I mean, the records were available, some in larger, like your, Best Buys and that kind of thing. But in any event, what the result of it was, even though they were signing to a label that they did not necessarily understand to be a Christian label with a capital C, that's very much the reputation that the label had, and therefore the reputation that the band had, which was unfortunate because, for starters, the music, whatever this even means, the music was not Christian rock at all. Neither musically, and again, what could that mean? But certainly not lyrically. If anything, it was sort of pushing against a number of the norms, or at least seemed to be sort of in tension with it was definitely not the kind of thing that you would expect to find in a Christian, bookstore, music store, or whatever, and led to a lot of people returning the records and that kind of thing, because it really was just not. I mean, the first song on the first album was about a trans person, which is not what you were hearing in 1995 anywhere, really.
Right.
That was not. I mean, that wasn't. Not just in the Christian world, but anywhere. That was not really something that people were talking about.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. If you were just tuning in, you're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies. And my guest today is Matt Hinton, who wrote, directed, and produced his brand new documentary entitled Parallel Love. Yes, it was real interesting. Lee Bozeman, who is the lead singer of the group, was sort of really pushing the limits. Does he write the songs? Who writes the songs with the group?
Yeah, I mean, he certainly writes the lyrics, and depends on the album and so forth. That different people bringing in different ideas or what have you. But you would have to call him the principal songwriter, I guess.
Okay, because he, even in his performance, because he is fascinating to watch, and that's what everybody talks about, why they came, because it is the music itself. It's interesting. He has this really lovely, very sensual voice, and then you've got all these other aspects of really kind of hitting it, like you said, hard rock, punk rock. It's kind of a real interesting, eclectic sound that's very unique. But he came across rather androgynous, I think, and that's kind of the intention there, because he was very thin and very handsome man. Was that the intention to like stir things up, or did that just sort of evolve and become that?
Yeah, I think that. I think part of it is, a lot of his influences. It's not androgynous in the way that it's not like he was wearing dresses or anything.
No. I don't mean it that way.
Though he did actually, he did on one occasion. Now that I think of it, but that wasn't his main thing. I mean, he was mainly wearing vintage suits from the 50s and 60s. Was sort of more of his look. But yes, there was an elegance, you'd have to say, to the way that he. So I think that part of that. From the start was just who his main influences were, who were people like Morrissey and David Bowie and that kind of thing.
I get that.
And so I think that's probably where it started. But then also I think that you see the reaction that you're getting, and both for good and for ill. It's not everybody was pumped about that. So but I think he really leaned into that pretty hard. And sort of got a kick out of that reaction that he was getting. And there's another sense. I mean, he's very charismatic and provocative on stage, which is not who he is at all as a person, neither then nor now. Not that he's not a charismatic human being, but he's not. He's you'd have to say more understated, and I don't know if shy is the word, but he's not. He didn't put himself out there in the same kind of way.
No.
So, which I think is probably true of a lot of performers. But so I think that it's a role that he was playing more than anything. So I think because of that, he felt like he could kind of do anything.
Well, I agree, and he really was pushing the envelope to do that. And then when you are interviewing him now in present day time, he's totally different than the person that you saw on stage. And that is exactly what happens to performers. They're not on when they're off the stage. They the lights come up and they the light bulb goes off and they're a totally different person on stage than they
good
are.
Thing. Who in the world would want to live with that?
I know.
Right? What a nightmare. But by the way, so yes, a totally different person now, but at the same time, there's still hints of it. There's, the beginning of the film, he says, he's talking about, now he's a priest, right? So for one thing, how could it be that guy was one of the ones that became a priest? But so he becomes a priest, and he's at the beginning of the film, he's talking about, sometimes he wears this cassock, which is this, this black robe that Orthodox priests wear. So sometimes he wears sometimes he doesn't wear the cassock out in public because he doesn't want to be looked at. But then sometimes he does wear it because he does want to be looked at.
Yes.
And that's a funny little thing. And so there are sort of glimpses, I think, of who he always has been as a performer and so on, even to this day. The
dichotomy between the two selves coming out, kind of interesting there. So let's talk a bit about the life-changing car accident and how that had affected. Did you knew them then, correct? And my band was touring with them, and so it was we had guys in both bands in the van, and then there was a vehicle that was following, which was me and two of the other guys, one guy in the band that I had been at the time, and then the bass player of Luxury were in the car following. So the three of us, had a front row seat, as it were, to actually watching the wreck occur. And pretty devastating, the fact that anyone survived that wreck.
Yeah.
So how did that? I mean, and it was right after the release of their first album, and they were on a trajectory of really building a name for themselves and an audience, and really on the precipice of stardom. It sounded like, and then this tragedy happened. So how did that affect each one of them? I mean, here they later on, three of them become priests. So do you believe the accident had something to do with them becoming priests? Or
well, as a filmmaker, it's a great temptation, of course, to see that as being this event that pushed them in that direction. But I mean, who can say? Like, who can say what would have happened had that not occurred? Whether they would have become priests or not. But I think that you'd have to say that wreck caused each person who is affected by it, which is sort of all of us, really, even those of us who weren't, injured terribly. But it caused each of us, I think, to have a greater sense of our own mortality, yes. And that either that we could have died then, or there's no particular reason that that I won't die today.
Exactly.
That is not promised to us. So I think that sort of additional just caused a kind of greater seriousness and trying to account for life and I mean, I think that I mean, what can you say?
Right,
I mean,
right.
you don't know how things would have gone otherwise, but I can only imagine that it was transformative in a variety of ways.
I'm sure it was, and I mean, it has to be. It has to be.
Yeah.
Because
Sure.
They literally, they shouldn't have come out of that accident.
Yeah. 3 broken necks.
Yeah.
One, Lee was, me and a couple of guys had to push the van lift the van off of Lee, who was stuck underneath it. So half of his body was out of the van and half was in, with the weight of it resting on his midsection. So he just broke everything. Like, it was rough.
Yeah, I mean, just amazing that he was able to come out of that the way he did. So they all did recover, and then they went back into the studio and recorded again, or they went back on tour again. And then they just recorded the brand new album. You said Trophy. So how has the music changed? We only have like a minute left, Matt. How has the music changed from before this, the accident until now? How has it changed?
Yeah, I think that there's probably a greater variety, and less of a priority on being super heavy. Like, there are some, there were some rockers for sure, but it's not, it's not the same kind of emphasis on that. I mean, I think it's really just sort of, when a song is written, then sort of taking the bare bones of the melody and stuff and doing what the song seems to dictate. And so I think that on this record there's a lot of variety. So
wonderful.
So yeah, it's called Trophies. And is to be really, by the time anybody hears this, it will be released.
That's correct.
And will be available on Spotify and Apple and what have you.
Wonderful. And the movie is out now, and
it's in
theaters now, and it will be coming to a streaming service in the future. So please look for Parallel Love. And we have been talking to writer, director, and producer Matt Hinton and his new documentary Parallel Love about the band Luxury. Thank you so much for being on the show, Matt. It's been a pleasure. You're welcome.
Thanks.
Go to the Jan Price Show on Facebook to learn more about upcoming shows, and while you're there, like my page. And to listen to the Jan Price Show Movie Minute reviews and to archive shows that you may have missed, go to thejanpriceshow.com. And also look for the Jan Price Show All About Movies on iHeartRadio's podcast channel.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1, streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
The Ozio Theater in downtown Monterey is now open every day, showing independent and foreign films. The Ozio Theater has new concession offerings, including beer, wine, hard cider, and their homemade lush slush. You can now schedule private event screenings for community charity events, birthdays, anniversaries, or just a fun gathering of friends. For more information, visit the Ozio Theater online at oziotheater.com.